Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Feld, and today I will invite you to my studio, and we're going to talk about my conceptual development. I will show how I build my work and how I decorate. And yes, I do have this license plate, and everybody kind of laughs. So if you see it, it's me. So please stop by and say hi. Welcome to my studio space. It's pretty small, but works really well for me. I have a few designated areas, and when COVID started, I actually started teaching classes online. So working with Zoom and different medium now, it's getting a little bit easier, but I still think it's not ideal for any type of art classes to be teach online. But well, it is what it is, and this is the back side of the studio space. So it's quite clean and organized, and some of my friends think that I'm not a real artist because everything is clean, but it's just because it's too small. I build outside, so later I will show you the space where I actually work. Um, I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Russia, where I actually studied chemistry and developmental psychology. And when almost 20 years ago, my husband and I, we moved to San Jose, and I went back to school and I studied at San Jose State, where I received my Bachelor of Fine Art in Spatial Art, and my concentration one was in ceramics, as well as I was doing some web and graphic design. For the grad school, a few years later, I decided to go to Cincinnati, Ohio, and I had a few reasons, and the main one was I wanted to study Rookwood pottery, which was basically the first art pottery that was developed in the United States. And I was working in the museum over there, so I was lucky enough to handle all this work. And yes, this is not a painting, the image on the framed image on the right, it's actually ceramics. During my years at grad school, I mainly concentrated on mold making and slip casting, which was pretty foreign for me, and I didn't really know how to handle it. And I don't really like mold making because you kind of bound to one shape and you cannot do anything else. So what I did, it was a lot of fun since the school was all about slip casting and you work with porcelain. So at the end, you always end up with like 5-7 inches of slab that cannot be used and reused for mold making, and it will go to the landfill. So I collected hundreds of soft stuffed animals and I dipped them into the porcelain slab. After that, they were fired. And over there, we had the facility where I could do all those firings because it's really smoky and it's stinky, so it's not really environmentally friendly. But what happens, the inside of the animal will burn out and you end up with a porcelain shell, which gives you really like all the fine details. So that was I was doing over there. But I build all my sculptures, so all my work is one of the kind, and I really like to use coil building technique. And later in this presentation, I have a short video where you will see my building process from beginning till the end. But what I really like about coil building, it's really versatile. So technically, you can build almost anything using this technique. When I discovered underglazes, I realized that I can combine my passion about painting and hand building in one. And when I started using underglazes, it was like 2009, 2010. Um, some of the underglazes you only can fire to the low temperature, but now Amica Velvet developed the whole line when you can fire up to cone 10 and colors stay the same. So when I give hands-on workshops, we usually not only talk about different type of underglazes, but I show all the test styles. So at the end, if you have questions, please come back to this and we'll kind of address this issue more. Because I know some of you fire cone 5, some cone 10, but again, we're going to look at some test styles and you will see that only one thing matters is your clear glaze. It's only one thing that will change your color. So as I mentioned before, all my work is one of the kind, and every time I work on a series of work, I start building few pieces at the same time, and when I'm done, in a lot of cases, I have kind of solid idea what I want to paint on the surface and how I want to develop the narrative. But in some cases, it doesn't really work. And when people ask me, oh, do you plan everything? The answer would be yes and no. Because sometimes I plan and it works. Sometimes it doesn't, and new ideas come in and I will change my mind. And yes, all the stories are not like my personal stories, even though like this one, the girl that is painted, she looks like my mom. It happened intentionally, it just happened. Because when you work really close with the painting and creating the story, whatever is in your head kind of comes out, and sometimes you just cannot control it. So I work on the different scales, and in addition to freestanding sculptures, I really like to work with teapots. All my teapots, they are, I call them dysfunctional teapots. You cannot brew tea them. They're too small, and usually the opening is too small, but they all have all the attributes of a tea. So they have body, they have a handle, a spout, a lid, and I treat them as textiles because in the small, they're small, right? So, and on a small scale, I can think about what type of story I want to work with. Also, I can add some new colors or experiment with new colors, especially with glazes. And I really love to do some carving and different type of carving. Usually, my carving is based on like driftwood, and I don't really like to copy, so I don't make any trompe l'oeils, but I like to have the hint of something that is coming from nature. So three things that I really like. The first one is the sculptural work, one of the kind. The second is the carving surface, carved surface, and the narrative that I paint with underglazes. So all my academic research is about surface decoration. And that's why I like to travel. I do a lot of ceramic related travel. I studied Majolica painting in Deruta. When you dip your bisqued piece in the tin-based glaze and you start painting right on the unfired glaze surface. And after that, it goes to the firing and all the bright colors will come into the surface. I went to Mexico, to Tonalá, where I learned all about Barro Brunido, the type of decoration that is done also, well, actually it's done on a greenware stage. So you have your piece, you burnish it first, you use colored slip, you paint on the surface, you burnish it again, and it goes through one firing. So it's very fragile, and a lot of pieces gonna be ruined during the firing. So people don't really like to kind of stay with this type of technique, and I tried this with my students only once. Everybody hated me for that. It's really, really difficult one. Um, I had an opportunity to go to Turkey, where I spent time in Kütahya, and I studied another technique and actually was introduced to the process of working on tiles in the factory, which is not really glamorous because it's a factory. You're just paying the same design over and over and over, and you cannot come up with anything new because it's just the production. But all this literally influenced me in my work. For a while, I stepped away from the narrative that I really like to paint on the surfaces and work with a lot of decorative elements and try to introduce more flowers and geometric designs in addition to kind of carved surfaces or textured glazes. But again, you cannot go against your nature. That's why every time when I give workshops, I tell my students and all the participants, you don't have to do what I do. You have to find what you like. Because again, I enjoy painting flowers, but it wasn't me. And back to my narrative, but I started working in a slightly different scale. So instead of building really large sculptures, because shipping kind of is getting too expensive, I scaled down, but at the same time, I could use the small scale to introduce the narrative that it's more intimate. Because in this case, you have to be really close to work. You actually have to hold it in your hands to see all the details close up. So the process, how it goes, I bisque fire everything first, and I paint with underglazes. I will show later a short video of the process, but it's going to look very quick, and I will have really short segment when you will see like a real painting, which is painful to watch. It's very, very slow. You can paint on any type of clay. So it doesn't matter if you're working with white clay, brown clay, yellow. Underglazes will cover the surface completely. But also, you can treat underglazes as dare you a pig, like acrylic type of paint, or really watered down, almost like a watercolor. And what you see, that's what you will get. At the end, all the underglaze is going to be slightly bright and slightly darker. And this is an example. I usually draw with pencil. I do all the freehand drawings, but you can do any type of image transfer on the surface. And this is the same to images after the glaze firing. I go through 2 firings. So the first one is bisque. I do all the paintings at once, put all the glazes on the surface, and fire it second time. Based on the type of glaze that I use, I either go low fire, so I stay roughly cone 04, or I can go to cone 5. But again, it's based on the glaze that I want to have on the surface. Because all my work is not functional, it doesn't have to be washed in the dishwasher. So I don't really worry about vitrification of clay. But if you're working with the functional wear, you have to fire to the temperature that your clay has to be fired to be fully vitrified. Again, going back to traveling, because all my life is kind of half of the year I work in my studio and teach full-time. Well, I'm an adjunct, so I teach part-time in multiple schools, but when you combine everything, it becomes a full-time. So, and a few months out of the year, I usually travel and participate in different symposiums. And this was my first time in China, where I kind of came back to the original ideas when I work on a large scale, build abstract female figurative shapes, and do different firings. I really like to experiment and not only, well, it's kind of part of my personality. I cannot settle down with something, like with one thing. I always want to do different things and try different things out. And for a while, I was doing raku firings. So these pieces, they are raku fired using underglazes and low fire glazes. But again, painting, I cannot kind of separate myself from painting. And years ago, I was exposed and introduced to China painting, which is another form of decoration on the clay surfaces. But this type of decoration is done on already fired glaze surface. You can use water-based medium, you can use oil-based medium, or you don't even have to paint, you can use the nib and kind of work gonna look like it was done with like a pen or pencil. And you do one more very low type of firing. This is another thing that I'm working on constantly. So in my studio, I have underglaze a painting section and the China painting section. And now I'm thinking how I can integrate all the work together. Since I teach different classes, including ceramic history, I was so lucky when I was invited to participate in this primitive type of firing symposium in Serbia, where I was actually introduced not to a different type of clay, but a different method of coil building. So the coil building technique that I will show you later is totally different to this one. But again, the more you know, the better your work gets, and it kind of forces you to think differently about how the ceramic was developed in different countries. And they have the type of firing that it's not a pit firing, it's kind of similar to pit firing, but before the work goes into the pit, it goes through the smoking process. In our case, it would be like going through the bisque, like really, really low bisque firing, when you candle your pieces and they not really go to the desired temperature but stay in a special place. But after that, you fire. So it was really fun experience. Am I gonna go back and am I gonna use this technique for my work? No, but I'm so glad that I had this experience. A lot of people ask me, what do I do? Do I have hobbies? Not really, but I really like baking. So I bake my own bread and I do bake a lot of pastries. And before COVID, I usually bake some stuff and take it to school. But now it's my poor husband. He has to eat a lot of those baked goods. Another thing that I'm really interested in, I collect textures. So I take a lot of photographs and I take all the textural surfaces. I'm looking for them everywhere. And now with the digital technology, it's so easy because your phone is always with you. But all my time, all my free time, or well, it's not free time, but literally just all my time, I try to spend in the studio. And usually I build really fast. It takes maybe months or 2 months out of the year when I'm done building. And after that, I stay in my studio and paint. I always use reference materials for all my paintings because it's much easier when you see in front of you instead of just inventing, looking like from imagination. Even it's always a tough question, um, where the imagination comes in, and how do you need to use your references. All my work, I create the composition, I'm coming up with the story, but all the elements, I like them to be as realistic as possible, and I do very detailed renderings of all the work. So, and this is a new series that I've been working for the last year. I don't know where the red is coming from. It's just there. And this is the last from the series when actually I made few rats that goes with this figurative sculptures. This summer, I was in North Carolina, where I start working on the new body of work. And actually, this one I'm gonna use as an example. How do I use coil building technique to work, and how I make all the sculptures using this technique.